Will it be recorded? And the answer is yes. We are recording right now. Okay, it's the top of the hour. Hello everyone, and welcome to our Lyme Moonshot virtual event. Cure Lyme by 2030, that's our aim. I'm Bonnie Crater. I'm co-founder and board member of Center for Lyme Action. We are going to have a Q&A after our material, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat function on your toolbar, on the Zoom toolbar. Hey, so for those of you who are new to Center for Lyme Action, I just wanted to introduce you to our organization. We are a 501c4. So a 501c4 is a special nonprofit that can do unlimited lobbying for the federal government. And our mission is to grow federal funding for Lyme disease. Very simple. Our strategy is that we hire professional lobbyists to help advocates, Lyme advocates, to advocate for more Lyme research in the legislative and executive branches. We take our values seriously. We are bipartisan. We talk to Democrats and Republicans and independents. We don't care. We are inclusive. We want to try to represent as many points of view as possible. There's a lot of sick people out there, so we want to be humane in our approach. And we believe in science, because science is going to solve this Lyme problem for us. I want to give a shout out and thanks to our key members. We are a member-driven organization, so we have charter members and gold members and supporting members. So thank you all for your support this year to supporting our operation. We also have individual memberships, $30 individual memberships. So you can go on centerforlymeaction.org and sign up for a membership. So thank you all for all your support. Hey, if you don't see your organization or name up here and you would like to be recognized in the future, you can just let me know. Thank you. Our agenda today includes lots of wonderful people. We have U.S. Senator Susan Collins and Deputy Secretary Eric Hargan from HHS, who are both making video remarks. Then I'm going to introduce my brother Jeff, who is a co-founder of Center for Lyme Action, and he's going to announce our Lyme Moonshot and give you an introduction as to what that is. Then we have two great keynote speakers, Colonel Nicole Malachowski, who's going to talk about Lyme and military readiness. This is a big issue. And then we have Dr. Akkad, who's going to give us a primer and all the latest stuff about Lyme disease. And then we'll follow on with a Q&A at the end. So first, I want to introduce U.S. Senator Collins. She's from Maine. I'm actually broadcasting here from Maine today. She is the original sponsor of the Kay-Hagan-Tick Act and chair of the Senate Aging Committee. Senator Collins serves on the Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee. That's the Health Committee in the Senate. She's also on the Senate Appropriations Committee. She's a very senior senator. She's 12th ranked, so the 12th most senior senator in the Senate. And she's a very dedicated public servant, has the longest perfect voting record of 7,000 plus votes. So welcome, and let's hear what Senator Collins has to say today. So queuing this up.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this online launch of the Lyme Moonshot. The term moonshot describes the concerted, all-out effort that this illness requires. The incidence of Lyme and other tick-borne diseases has skyrocketed. In 2003, Lyme disease infected approximately 30,000 Americans. The latest estimates show that nearly 500,000 Americans are suffering from Lyme. During the center's Washington fly-in February, I was grateful to be among the members of Congress recognized as Lyme champions. This was shortly after the Kay-Hagan-Tick Act I introduced was signed into law. Thank you for your support for that law. It is named in honor of the former Senator Kay Hagan, who passed away almost exactly 1 year ago due to complications from a tick-borne virus. The Tick Act takes a broad public health approach by providing communities and states with $150 million over the next 5 years for prevention, early detection, and treatment. Just last month, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a framework for a national strategy that the legislation mandates. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated what so many of you have known for so long, that infectious diseases are still a serious threat. We must continue to address the ongoing Lyme illnesses as well as the pandemic, and we must not lose momentum in research to combat other devastating diseases. The Lyme Moonshot's goal of going beyond prevention and treatment to finding a cure by the year 2030 is ambitious. But with the national effort the Tick Act sets in motion and your effective advocacy, all systems are go. Thank you and keep up the great work.
Nice remarks from Senator Collins. Next, I want to introduce Deputy Secretary Eric Hargan, also another good friend of the Lyme community. He is, of course, Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and he manages a gigantic budget of $1.3 trillion. He acts as the Chief Operating Officer for 80,000 employees at HHS and oversees the day-to-day operations and management of the department, which includes, Medicaid and Medicare and all of the NIH and all the departments that work on our health. So I'm pleased to introduce Secretary Hargan here, and here he is.
Hello, everyone. I'm Deputy Secretary Eric Hargan of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, and I'm grateful for the chance to address this important gathering today. Across the massive $1.3 trillion department that is HHS, our mission is to enhance and protect the health and well-being of all Americans by providing for effective health and human services and by fostering sound, sustained advances in the sciences. When it comes to Lyme disease, we have an important duty and opportunity to better execute on several aspects of that mission. As all of you know, Lyme and tick-borne diseases generally are a growing problem, and we know they warrant increased attention and prioritization in the federal government. That's what we've delivered under this administration, and today I want to particularly focus on how we're doing that by driving toward innovation in the Lyme disease space. Innovation is at the heart of so much we do at HHS. We know that so many of the daunting health challenges we face can only be solved by disrupting the status quo and developing new tools through creative, innovative action. In late 2018, HHS launched its Lyme Innovation Initiative to accelerate innovation in the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of tick-borne diseases through the development of next-generation technologies, interdisciplinary collaborations, and data-driven innovations. We took this commitment to a new level earlier this month with the announcement by HHS and the Stephen and Alexandra Cohen Foundation of a new public-private partnership, the LymeX Innovation Accelerator, which is the largest Lyme disease public-private partnership in history. The mission is to strategically advance Lyme and tick-borne disease solutions in direct collaboration with Lyme patients, patient advocates, and diverse stakeholders across academia, nonprofits, industry, and government. This LymeX effort, which will provide up to $25 million in innovation awards, draws on the success and experience of previous innovation efforts for neglected challenges, like kidney disease and HHS's KidneyX. LymeX is embracing a three-pronged approach to transform today's landscape. First, LymeX will engage stakeholders to facilitate patient-centered innovations. Second, it will advance education and awareness. And third, it will foster breakthroughs in next-gen diagnostics, including the LymeX Diagnostics Moonshot, a multi-million-dollar grand prize challenge that aims to revolutionize the field of testing for Lyme disease. But this partnership can only succeed if it involves working with patients and all the relevant stakeholders. Your expertise and passion will help guide our path forward as we seek to help those struggling from this disease. HHS and this administration have made achieving better health for all Americans a top priority, especially through tackling impactable, emerging, and neglected health challenges. Lyme disease represents all three, and it presents a real chance to move the needle. I wholeheartedly believe that Lyme disease is an area where, together, we can make real progress. We at HHS are taking decisive action because of you, for you, and with you. We're grateful for the bottom-up work that so many Lyme patients and patient advocates have done to illuminate this challenge and drive action. Together, we can deliver real innovation and real impact on the challenge of Lyme disease. So thank you again for inviting me to speak to you all today.
That was some nice remarks from Deputy Secretary Hargan. I am going to now introduce the Lyme Moonshot. So this is an initiative that that Center for Lyme Action is putting together, and my brother, Jeff Crater, is going to describe it for you. So Jeff is a co-founder and board member for Center for Lyme Action. He served in the House congressional staff. He was on the House Energy and Commerce Committee staff, and he's been advisor to 2 secretaries of energy. Jeff is also the former vice president of government relations for several large companies, and sadly, he's the parent of 2 children with Lyme disease. So Jeff, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you can share your screen to introduce the Lyme Moonshot.
All right, thank you, Bonnie.
Screen going here. Excellent. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, hi, everyone. So the question is, so why do we need a Lyme Moonshot? Well, as you see from the charts, since 1991, Lyme has steadily increased to over 300,000 cases annually, ending in 2018 on the chart, which is the last year we have data from the CDC. There's no reliable diagnostic or therapy, which we both desperately need. And we've had chronic underfunding at NIH. When we first examined this from the Center for Lyme Action perspective, the research dollars at NIH, in terms of real dollars, it was $23 million in 2018, which was even down from $26 million 18 years prior, in the year 2000. But since then, we're making progress. We're making a lot of progress to increase federal funding, but it's clear we need a massive infusion of funding measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 years through our 2030 Lyme Moonshot date. So on September 12th, 1962, in Houston, Texas, President Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard." So like putting a man on the moon, Lyme disease is a terribly complex disease that we don't fully understand right now, affecting millions of Americans. So that's why we need a Lyme Moonshot. Cure Lyme disease by 2030. We want to dramatically accelerate efforts to diagnose, treat, and prevent Lyme and other tick-borne diseases. We feel like the federal government is now waking up to the impacts of Lyme on patients and society in general. And funding is on the rise, it's good news, and we're positioned scientifically and technologically for a major breakthrough, but only if we seize this moment. So our Lyme Moonshot has 5 strategic goals. Number 1, lead from the top. Number 2, catalyze new scientific breakthroughs for evidence-based solutions. Number 3, unleash the power of data. Number 4, improve patient outcomes and access to care. And our 5th strategic goal, accelerate impact through public-private partnerships. So let's take the first one, lead from the top. So we recommend that the president create a White House TIC office, which stands for Tick-Borne Innovation, Collaboration, and Knowledge Office. This will be led what we call a Lyme leader to help coordinate interagency efforts on Lyme disease, as well as other tick-borne diseases. We recommend a corresponding TIC office be established in the Office of the Secretary at the Department of Health and Human Services as the lead Lyme agency. We'd like to see the White House TIC office develop a national Lyme strategy and establish a diverse blue ribbon task force to advise the White House Lyme leader and the White House TIC office. So number 2 of our strategic goals in the Lyme Moonshot, catalyze new scientific breakthroughs for evidence-based solutions. So what that means that, we want to increase federal funding, of course, for scientific research and development by first executing what we've already passed through Congress, the K-Hagen TIC Act, which relates to the CDC prevention programs, the Lyme and tick-borne disease prevention programs. The CDC has just started to implement the K-Hagen TIC Act by publishing a framework. We want NIH to execute its extensive strategic plan for tick-borne diseases. And this one we find very, very important and absolutely critical. We need to establish academic centers of excellence through the NIH mechanism and throughout the country with new funding for university-based research. This model has worked well for cancer research and should be repeated for Lyme and tick-borne diseases. We also want to foster an interagency One Health Lyme Moonshot by leveraging DOE and its incredible national laboratories, like at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. These national laboratories, Department of Energy, have they actually have the world's best supercomputing capability to analyze big data. And last but not least, we need to mitigate impact of tick-borne illnesses on our service members, our veterans, and their families. This should be embedded in military readiness. So number 3 of our strategic goals, and this dovetails from our recommendation on One Health and the use of supercomputing capability by our national laboratories. Unleash the power of data. We want to see a federal repository created for tick information data that can be shared by government, by researchers, and public health officials. Next, we believe it's important to leverage the existing IT infrastructure and build upon our largest dementia infrastructure from the BOLD Act that was created for Alzheimer's through the Alzheimer's Act of 2018. And then we'd like to see a piggyback of sorts on the Pandemic and All Hands Preparedness Act of 2019, which would improve the capacity of states and localities to respond to this natural emergency. And next, build upon the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, which would put more emphasis on data and data-driven innovation. And then lastly, call on our Lyme researchers to make their research public information, while of course ensuring much needed privacy. So next, enhance transparency by defaulting to what we call open data to accelerate scientific discovery. We know that transparency builds trust. And moving on to strategic goal number 4, improve patient outcomes and access to care. We must, and it goes without saying, protect the rights of our clinicians treating Lyme, and create a federal repository for Lyme and tick information, educate patients and the public and clinicians, and protect vulnerable and high-risk populations like our children, pregnant women, and our military. And then, of course, we want to reduce the burden of our current access care. So our fifth and final goal, strategic goal of this moonshot, is to accelerate impact through public-private partnerships. So these public-private partnerships to accelerate, we call on the establishment of public-private partnerships to accelerate mission delivery. Public-private partnerships are force multipliers for not only the taxpayer, but we've seen much swifter results. What the Stephen and Alexandra Cohen Foundation and HHS did on October 10th for Lyme X is truly just what the doctor ordered and should be commended as a model for public-private partnerships. We also want to leverage the private sector, match private funds with federal dollars 2-to-1 for commercially viable research. And like the AIDS epidemic, which had a coordinated project-like approach, the same is now needed for Lyme and tick-borne disease. So I say the countdown has started. It's time for the Lyme Moonshot. So what can you do? Well, first, we invite you to review our paper online, and you can review that at lymemoonshot.org. Next, we're urging Congress and the administration to implement our recommendations, and where necessary, draft new legislation to authorize agency action, as well as to increase appropriations to deliver on the Lyme Moonshot recommendations. And then, of course, we invite you for our virtual Dise fly-in, which will be held in February of 2021, as we advocate before Congress through our virtual meetings to turn these ideas in the Lyme Moonshot into action, so we can begin to cure Lyme disease by 2030. And then over to you, Bonnie.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So one of the initiatives that I think is really important are those academic centers. So the National Cancer Institute has over 30 of these around the country, and it's funding for academic institutions. The funding ranges from like $3 million to $12 million per institution, and it serves as really the basis for a lot of progress that we are benefiting so much in cancer today. So I want to encourage everybody to, you can type in lymemoonshot.org. That'll take you to the web page that you can read the policy paper in detail. I'm really excited that we're talking about congressional legislation to expand these programs. And please come to our fly-in in February. If you register for this event, you'll be invited to that one as well. So thank you, Jeff, for introducing us to the Lyme Moonshot idea. So next I want to introduce a special guest, special keynote speaker, Colonel Nicole Malachowski. Nicole is retired from the Air Force. Sadly, although she was being considered to be for the general officer level, she got bit by a tick. In my opinion, she would have become a general, but she did not and had to retire due to tick-borne illness. Nicole is the first female Thunderbird pilot. She's now a member of the National Women's Hall of Fame, and we know her well as a Lyme disease patient advocate. So over to you, Nicole.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the introduction, Bonnie, and I appreciate both you and Jeff and your vision in setting up the Center for Lyme Action, and of course, creating this roadmap strategy, if you will, with the Lyme Moonshot. It's really great to see Senator Collins and Deputy Secretary Hargan offer their support, and a great welcome to any other elected representatives joining us, and to your elite staff. I've been in your shoes, and I know that you're the gatekeepers to these decision makers, so the fact that you would join us here today is vital. And thank you to all the other patients, caregivers, and stakeholders out there joining us today for your efforts over the decades. And we're finally definitely going to make some progress here, okay? I was asked to briefly share my story. I think it's funny when you're asked to briefly share your story as a tick-borne illness patient, there is no brief. I could spend days recounting my story. You know, I was recruited for this event, like Bonnie said, by a tick, like countless other sufferers out there, not just across the Northeast, not just across the United States, but countless people around the globe, each one with their own unique story. And so it's with great humility that I share mine, unique to me, but I hope representative of all of those people out there. I want to give voice to the voiceless, those that are bedridden right now and housebound. We see you. I want to think about all of those people who have a decreased quality of life, who's lost their jobs, their livelihoods, children out there who are losing their childhoods, and especially to the undiagnosed and the misdiagnosed. We see you. And I speak today for sure in honor of the more than 2 million living veterans with service-connected disabilities, which include those of us with illnesses. I firmly believe, based on my experiences, that Lyme and tick-borne illness is not just a general public health issue, but that it's definitely a military readiness issue, and by extension, a national security issue. Next slide. So my name is Colonel Nicole Malachowski, United States Air Force, retired. And it's really hard to use those words, retired. On the 21st of July, 2017, I received this document. It's my medical discharge paperwork following a 2-year medical evaluation board in an attempt to rehab me by the military. It says, unfitting conditions, 100% disabled due to chronic tick-borne systemic illness, permanent retirement. That's how my 21-year, 7-month, 0-day amazing career that I wish I still had ended with those words, unfit for duty due to tick-borne illness. And I want to give on this first slide a little bit of context of my career, not to toot my horn or highlight achievements or any of that, but because I want to dispel a stigma and a myth that somehow Lyme disease and tick-borne illness is a disease or an illness of the weak, right? Or the people who are not strong, because it couldn't be further from the truth. Lyme disease and tick-borne illness impacts the strong, the courageous, the healthy, the brave, the accomplished. It's a disease of lawyers and teachers and doctors, our nation's children, our athletes, community leaders. It's a disease of heads of household. It's a disease that certainly impacts our service members, military families, as well as our veterans. You know, this kind of collage of pictures here is hard for me to look at. You know, in a nutshell, I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated there in 1996 and achieved my dream of going to pilot training. I did just good enough to become a fighter pilot and selected the mighty F-15E Strike Eagle, which is the plane you see me standing in front of there on the left. I went on to serve in 3 operational F-15E fighter squadrons. I ended up with every certification and qualification you could have as a fighter pilot. I led peers safely in and out of combat. I had the honor of commanding an F-15E fighter squadron. In there, I also did a tour up at Naval War College. I had the privilege of serving as a Thunderbird pilot, the first woman in history to do so. I also served twice at the White House, 2 different administrations, 2 different presidents, and boom, my career was gone in the blink of a bite. It's hard for me to look at these pictures. The one on the left, I'm in my green flight suit standing in front of that beautiful jet. That picture was taken approximately 3 months before my life would change unexpectedly, very unwelcomely, forever. In that picture, I'm the commander of an F-15E fighter squadron stationed at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Apparently, according to people at the time, we didn't have Lyme there. I think my story shows that that's actually not true. And as you look through the success of those pictures there, moving to the right, the most important thing is the picture on the right, which is what gives my life meaning, my family. But what you need to see in that picture is those are all military dependents. My children, my husband, who followed me, being stationed all around the United States and around the world, all places where we can be exposed to Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses. My husband became my caregiver overnight, and for all intents and purposes, he became a single dad to, at that time, about 4 or 5-year-old twins. This isn't just a military service member issue. It's about military families, and it's also about our veterans. Think about it. As I tell you a story, we're going on the next slide. I'm going to give you some details of my personal story, but I want you to think of this question in the background. If the emotional pull and tug of people suffering, which is what is going on in our community, isn't enough, ask yourself this, right? As a 21+ year experienced fighter pilot, I am worth millions of taxpayers' dollars in training, millions of dollars. So if the heart isn't pulled, maybe we can talk about the fact that the taxpayers of America did not get their return on investment in me. My career ended, millions of dollars in training gone due to a lack of education, awareness, diagnostics, and therapeutics for Lyme disease and tick-borne illness patients like me. You know, when you look at this slide, it's actually hard for me to look at again. It brings back a lot of memories, like a lot of the patients who are probably watching this right now. My story began in the summer of 2012. I said I was the commander of an F-15E fighter squadron. I was physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually fit. And it was the summer, and I felt like I got the flu. Pretty classic story. I had joint pain, muscle pain, fever, malaise. I went to the doctor and I said, "Hey, doc, there's a rash on my hip. Is that connected to any of this?" It was discussed. It was concerning enough that he brought in another military doctor. They talked in front of me. They talked outside in the hallway. And it was determined that we didn't technically have Lyme disease, even though it was a red circular rash. It was determined that what I had was a spider bite. I was given some topical ointment and 10 days of an antibiotic and sent on my way. What would happen over the next few weeks or next few days, really, that rash would expand out to about 6 to 7 inches. I would actually have classic target bullseye rash with central clearing, which, by the way, for those of us in the know, it's actually pretty lucky because not everybody gets a rash, and those who do don't always get the typical, if you will, the myth of the typical target rash. Anyways, I didn't know at the time to go back to my doctor and tell him about that symptom. They didn't explain to me to keep an eye on that rash and describe what it looked like. What I do know is that my symptoms got worse. And I went back to the doctor a few times, had some random blood tests that showed inflammation and infection, but no one could nail it down. Within 3 months, being the commander of an F-15E fighter squadron, I would be grounded, unable to fly because I started having paresthesia and numbness down the right side of my body. I started having problems reading and writing. I had big short-term memory problems, which is not good if you're flying at 500 miles an hour. I started having speech problems, word finding problems, and coordination problems, dropping things with my right hand. I would trip over my right foot. This was concerning to the doctors, as it should be. And I was sent to both military and civilian specialists, where MRIs showed non-specific white matter lesions in my brain. My symptoms would wax and they would wane and they would come and they would go, and I would somehow elude, all right, any kind of medical diagnosis. It was a very difficult time for me and my family. Within about a year, I was moved up to a new assignment at Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. So approximately 10 to 12 months after that rash that I had on my hip, while having big problems cognitively and physically, while all trying to keep hold tight of my career that I wanted so much, I went for a hike with my kids. I came home, and a few days later, I pulled an engorged tick off the back of my right thigh. Immediately, my symptoms flared even worse than they had ever been. There was a lot of confusion this whole time, doctors thinking I had multiple sclerosis, but I didn't quite meet the diagnostic criteria just yet. I was told over and over by civilian and military specialists, it'll progress. We'll get you this diagnosis of MS. And that's the red herring and the rabbit hole that we went down for so long. As I sat there at Naval War College, losing my ability to read and to write as a student, increasing all of my problems. I now had a balance deficit. I had eye problems, sound and light sensitivity. I finally got tested for Lyme disease. A brand new, young, open-minded dermatologist thought to test me when nobody else to that point had. I was positive ELISA, positive Western blot, and I was given 28 days of doxycycline, which those of you in the know are aware that that's more than the 2 to 3 weeks that most doctors do. Unfortunately, when I took that doxycycline, I got way worse. My symptoms never went away. And over the next 4 years, I would start to decline. Fatigue, pain, brain fog, executive cognitive dysfunction, until in the summer of 2016, when I was acting as the military aide to the First Lady of the United States, working in the White House East Wing, I woke up and I could not move or speak. I was temporarily paralyzed. I don't know how long that lasted, but I would have these moments where I would just zone out. To the Air Force's credit, they cut bait and they sent me up to Boston, where I went to a major academic hospital. Keep in mind, I'd spent 4 years going to major hospitals on the East Coast and in the Midwest. I finally got up to Boston, where the doctors realized I had had 2 tick bites, one for sure known by a tick, and they cast the net very wide. and they followed my history. And that's when I finally was accurately diagnosed to include other tick-borne pathogens at that time. And I began my treatment. I had an IV PICC line and at-home healthcare nurse. I was bedridden 22 plus hours a day for about 9 months. I was unable to walk safely. I could not read or write, and I was unable to have any kind of reasonable conversation because I had a hard time speaking. I spent another year in rehab to include vestibular rehab, and during that time, I was medically retired from the military. During that time, I lost my identity as a military officer, my profession as a fighter pilot, and my means for providing for my family. And in December of 2017, I was medically retired from the career I loved. If you look at that picture of me next to my military medical records, I want you to know something. Those are double-sided. Yeah, that's how much invasive testing, unnecessary testing, that's how much taxpayers' money was spent sending me all over the United States to get this fixed, when if we just had the education, awareness, and diagnostics and therapeutics, this would have never happened. What happened to me was largely preventable. And I'm not okay today. I'm a heck of a lot better. I'm standing tall, I'm talking to you. I still struggle to read and write. I still have a balance deficit. I have autonomic nervous system dysfunction, and I have executive cognitive dysfunction. Just last week, I got lost going to the grocery store. We have someone that we pay that lives in the house with me to help with my activities of daily living because I can't do it myself. Last week, this is a checkbook. I forgot how to write a check. I flew F-15E Strike Eagles in combat, and I forgot how to write a check. I had to Google it so that I could write a personal check for $200. It doesn't always go away. Some people stay sick, and I'm one of them. I want to make a point here, not to bring everybody down, right? But that's how low it got. I couldn't even talk to my husband. I couldn't play with my kids for 2 years. I'm still working every day just to exist and function and to make an impact, which is hard for someone who served her country for 21 plus years. Your Air Force today is 2,000 pilots short, 2,000 pilots short to meet our national military strategy. And you lost one and experienced one because of Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses. Not once in my career was I taught about the risk of ticks in all the places I was around the world. Not once did we talk about prevention, permethrin, picaridin. Not once was I taught how to do a tick check. Not once was I told what symptoms to look for. This was preventable. This was preventable. Now in retirement, I serve still officially as an Air Force Wounded Warrior Program mentor. I've been doing it for 3 years, and not a month has gone by that I haven't been mentoring an Air Force service member that's being medically discharged for Lyme disease or tick-borne illness. Does that surprise you? I hope that it does. Just this morning, I was texting with a fighter pilot who was retired last year for Lyme disease. Right now, I'm mentoring an elite explosive ordnance disposal technician who was just medically retired for Lyme disease. I was chatting this morning and giving advice to a C-17 pilot, active duty right now, who just had a PICC line put in. I wanted advice on how to work with the PICC line and the things that he should be looking for. An experienced C-17 pilot who's currently in the same medical evaluation process I was, that might lose his career overnight. Countless informal inquiries I get weekly from military dependents, military spouses, about their military kids or themselves. It's a full-time daily job for me. Ask yourself, is that reasonable? Is it reasonable that an old washed-up fighter pilot is the main source of information on tick-borne illness, not just for service members who need it, but for our military families as well as other veterans? This is a military readiness issue. Do you know how long it takes to make a 21-year fighter pilot whose training is worth millions of dollars? 21 years. Do you know how long it takes to make a 15-year experienced C-17 mission commander who's combat proven? 15 years. Do you know how long it takes to make an elite 10-year experienced explosive ordnance disposal technician? 10 years. The military is unique. Our mission is unique. Our skills are unique. You don't find another one of me off the street. You don't do an interview to bring in a 15-year C-17 pilot. You don't lateral us from some other company. Next slide. So I want to ask you this as we look at some suggestions, I guess, where the Department of Defense and VA can be helpful. Think of it, especially my staffers watching. What cohort of the American public is exposed to more tick-borne illness and global vectors than our military? and the military dependents who move around with them. The DoD and the Department of Veterans Affairs have a professional, ethical obligation and a moral imperative to be leaders in this space. There is opportunity at the DoD and VA who have proven over time that they are capable of deep and amazing medical innovations, right? Think about it, all the things they've done in battlefield medicine, all the way to Ebola response and anything in between. We have unleashed their innovation before. We can unleash it for Lyme disease and tick-borne illness patients. I've given a list there just off of my own mind. Some of them are actually in the Lyme Moonshot roadmap there. One of my favorites is the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, the only place in government where patients have an equal voice on scoring research grants. It's run by the Department of the Army. The tick test program, the health surveillance plans, global emerging infectious surveillance, the pest management board. I happen to know there's amazing people who work in there who want to do the right thing. But until you, Congress, say that it's a priority, and until you, Congress, decide to resource and fund them, they can't reach their full potential either. The Department of Health and Affairs was working with me to create a frontline medical clinician education program, how to teach prevention, how to know the symptoms, how to think about tick-borne illness and Lyme disease as a differential diagnosis. Unfortunately, and understandably, that's been kind of sidelined because of coronavirus. But I ask you staffers to keep that on your notepad and ask them about it. Ask DHA what they're doing and if they can re-up that initiative. Think about DARPA. DARPA could solve this before 2030 if we unleash their full power. And the Department of Veterans Affairs has some amazing people with creative ideas and innovation, the Office of Research and Development, and think of the entire biobank available through their Million Veterans program. There is a lot of opportunity here. I'm going to end with this. Please don't allow yourself to become distracted by the noise and the unnecessary controversy of the words Lyme wars or chronic Lyme disease. Peel back, right, the chaff and see what's actually being said with those terms. It's a lot of patients saying that we're suffering. It's a lot of patients saying that we need help. It's patients saying that there's gaps in science. We need you to help us acknowledge the pain and suffering. We need you to have detailed identification of those gaps in science. We need you to recognize and acknowledge the rapidly evolving science that's going on. And we need you to prioritize the research and fund it. Science is going to bridge the gap. And this Lyme Moonshot is a roadmap and a great start for doing that. Patients deserve answers. Patients deserve an end to their suffering. This certainly includes service members, military veterans, and our military families. Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses are a military readiness issue and therefore a national security strategy issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. These are all fantastic ideas. I think we have some, but not all of these in our Lyme Moonshot policy paper, but you and I we should chat afterwards so we can talk about a few more of these.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. All right, next, I want to introduce a well-known Lyme physician, Dr. John Aucott. Dr. Aucott is Associate Professor of Medicine at Johns Hopkins University. He's well known for a very important study called the SLICE study, where he's studying a cohort of patients in the Baltimore area. It's a longitudinal study, means he studies them over a long period of time, actually 2 years. And this SLICE study has supplied samples to loads of really important and insightful research projects that are helping us figure out Lyme disease. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Aucott. He is going to give us a primer on Lyme disease and tell us a little bit about what's going on from his perspective. So Dr. Aucott, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Welcome. How are you? You can share yours.
Good. Thanks, Bonnie. I really appreciate the chance to talk today. Before I start giving you a little primer on Lyme disease and the needs for research, I just want to tell you how humbled I am to speak after Colonel Malachowski. I mean, her story represents hundreds of stories that I heard that got me into this field. The spider bite story was one that I heard over and over again and saw people's lives derailed and people that were in previously great health and high functioning. And, Nicole's story really is why I got into this field, and I can't say how much I appreciate the chance to follow her and speaking today. So Lyme disease is a zoonotic disease. That means it's housed by animals and it's vector borne. It's transmitted from animals to other animals and humans by a vector, in this case a tick. And it's the disease that the ticks carry is called Lyme disease, and it's caused by a spirochete bacteria, these spiral-shaped bacteria, which are quite unusual. And one of the themes today is how difficult a disease this is to study because of the unusual nature of the bacteria that causes it. When the vector ticks bite humans, it transmits the bacteria, and that causes Lyme disease. Contrary to popular opinion, deer actually don't get Lyme disease, don't carry the disease. They just serve as a food source to expand the tick populations. So more ticks in more places causing more diseases. These maps over time show you how ticks are expanding relentlessly across North America, bringing tick-borne diseases into more areas all across our country. And these ticks that transmit tick-borne disease are quite difficult to see. This isn't like a mosquito bite where you feel the mosquito bite you and itch immediately. So this is the infamous CDC poppy seed muffin public service announcement where ticks are scattered between these poppy seeds. And if you can find them, you're better than most people. There's the 5 ticks. Obviously small, hard to find, and very effective vectors at transmitting diseases to humans. So Alan Steer really brought attention to Lyme disease in the late 70s when he described the first 512 cases. Each one's a red dot. And just to give you a feel for the tempo of this relentless pandemic, it's insidious but relentless. And so these 500 cases reported, and then a couple decades later spread all the way up and down the Northeast and into the Mid-Atlantic, upper Midwest, West Coast, and cases across the South and really in most of the United States. And then again, over the next decade and a half, spreading more into the interior. This relentless spread, a geographic spread of Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses, really leaving no area unaffected, really putting us all at risk of these spreading diseases. So they're important for 2 age groups, centered around 50, but also people forget this is primarily even more a disease of children. So an estimated 75,000 children will be diagnosed annually with Lyme disease. So children, when they're outdoors playing in their playgrounds in your own backyard, that's where Lyme disease is transmitted, and children are at a special risk. One person estimated this is 3 school buses worth of children infected every day in the United States with Lyme disease. The numbers are important. There's 3 types of numbers here. The black bars in the bottom are the number of cases that make it to the CDC through case reporting, around 30,000 a year. But everyone agrees that the true number of cases is approximately tenfold. So that brings you up to 300, 400,000 new cases a year in the green bars. But what we want to also focus on today is the people in the black line that don't recover from their Lyme disease, even after treatment. That black line represents what patients will tell you is called persistent Lyme disease or chronic Lyme disease. In the research world, we call it post-treatment Lyme disease. But whatever you call it, this is a relentless increase in people that don't recover after their Lyme disease is diagnosed. And again, up in the hundreds of thousands, some estimates suggest it could even be in the millions of people that have this persistent long-term chronic change in their health with persistent illness. So a little primer here on Lyme disease. The take-home point of this slide is Lyme disease is a persistent infection. So in untreated patients after a tick bite, the infection starts in the skin when the bacteria is multiplying, but the infection persists and it moves out of the skin into the bloodstream and often goes to the nervous system with facial palsy or meningitis. And in unfortunate people, it can involve the heart. This is a cause of mortality in a subset of patients. And the infection persists. The scale here is months. So even after that, people can develop encephalopathy and arthritis. Now this time course makes it look like it's all a perfect transition from one to another. Of course, patients don't read the textbook and things don't always follow this linear path. But the take-home point is Lyme disease is a persistent infection that the human immune system can't eradicate and that lasts for months, sometimes for years, unless it's adequately treated. So diagnosis, this is the toolbox that clinicians and patients find empty many times. That testing for Lyme disease is based on antibodies. The so-called two-tier testing starts with an ELISA and then goes to a Western blot. Measuring antibodies doesn't tell you if the infection is present. This is not like COVID, where the nasal swab actually measures the viral DNA. Antibody tests only measure the human immune response. That's full of limitations. And to compound it, the schematic for using this two-tier test has multiple variables of time, types of Western blots. It's basically fraught with errors in the use by clinicians. And this is a huge hole in the toolbox for clinicians to diagnose their patients adequately and accurately. A huge gap in what we need. So what's the prognosis of Lyme disease? I mean, the good news is, and there is some good news, is that accurate diagnosis, early diagnosis, accurate treatment prevents many of the patients from developing later manifestations. And in fact, many people recover their health when they're treated early and accurately. The bad news is that the people who don't get adequate early diagnosis or have other risk factors, or sometimes even without risk factors, are at risk for developing chronic or recurrent symptoms. And this may be anywhere from 10 to 20% of people with Lyme disease. It depends on what stage the diagnosis and treatment are initiated. It's obviously less in people that have early diagnosis and more in people that have later diagnosis. But in these 10 or 20% of people, they develop persistent symptoms of Lyme disease. And this persistence is not trivial. It's significant life-altering symptoms like fatigue, cognitive complaints, and pain. These symptoms are graphically illustrated in one of our research publications that shows these symptoms of what we're calling here post-treatment Lyme disease or persistent Lyme disease, where patients have these symptoms like fatigue and pain and cognitive symptoms. And in our studies, we compare them to controls without Lyme disease. And you can see the symptoms are dramatically more severe and more prevalent in the patients compared to the controls. You may recognize this graph. It looks very similar to the graphs that you see with the long haulers in COVID. There's something about infectious diseases and ability to create these longer term problems that's shared in other diseases like COVID. And we, in our research, quantify these symptoms. And so the patients in red have dramatically more symptoms, fatigue and pain and sleep disruption, than the controls in blue. And this affects their quality of life. So their quality of life is lower than normal people without Lyme disease. So these are, again, not trivial. This isn't the fatigue of somebody that wakes up and is a little tired. This is the fatigue that puts people in bed for weeks or months and dramatically alters their quality of life compared to non-Lyme infected patients. There's huge cost to the patients. Colonel Malkowski's talk gave you an idea of the immense personal toll, but there's also a dollar amount attached to society from testing, insurance costs, but especially, the cost due to those persistent symptoms and how it takes people out of the workforce, how it impacts their family. Some people have estimated that this may be $50 billion or more a year of costs to our society and our government and ourselves. So how are these persistent symptoms in Lyme disease treated? Well, here's the real bad news. There's no FDA-approved therapy. There are in vitro and animal models, and these laboratory
Did we just lose Dr. Akot?
I think so.
Okay. All right, we still have Nicole.
Maybe he'll rejoin in a moment.
Rejoin in just a minute. Or I could do his slides. Not as well as he can, though. Okay. Can we just give him a minute to like rejoin? What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah.
I think so. Nicole, do you have an opinion on this?
I think the only opinion I have is that as a patient and someone who has persistent symptoms and who's friends with a lot of people watching who have these same persistent symptoms, that I hope that people are feeling hope here. There are great minds, Dr. John Alcott, of course, being one of them, who realize there's a there. You know, we don't have the scientific answers, and that's what we're going after, but the open-mindedness and the compassion that's being showed by people like John Alcott. You know, I'm actually, the past few years, I've had a chance to be a consumer reviewer or a patient scorer at the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, which I alluded to. And I get so excited, right, every year to read these applications because there are some seriously intelligent, highly compassionate, open-minded. There's some translational, you know, medicine going on, people coming from different fields, you know, that are coming in, and it gives me hope. And you know, seeing the Lyme Moonshot and seeing what you guys are doing, knowing that there's credible, legitimate scientists and clinicians out there that are helping us, you know, we can sit and we can talk about the hardship because that's real and the suffering is real. And it needs to be balanced, I think, with optimism and hope. And that's what I'm feeling right now as I listen to Dr. Alcott.
I agree. But we still don't have a good diagnostic, and we don't have a good therapy for people with persistent symptoms. But there's a lot of, you know, great work that's going on. It just needs to be amplified by a huge Lyme Moonshot, and that's where we, you know, this whole effort comes in.
You know, philanthropy has done such an amazing job. Individual philanthropists, major foundations like the Cohen Foundation, you know, of really carrying us through these last few decades. And in order to get these big milestone steps that we need, we have to partner with government. You know, I worked in the veteran space, I still do. And oftentimes it's easy for us to say, well, the Department of Veterans Affairs isn't getting it right, I'm just going to go do it my own. At the end of the day, with a problem this complex and this gnarly, all the stakeholders have to align and come together. And that's, I think, the beauty of the Lyme Moonshot.
Yeah. Well, so, some people say to me, Nicole, you know, I'm not sure if we increase the NIH budget, you know, is it going to be spent correctly? What do you say to that?
Well, is it going to be spent correctly? You know, the way that we get major government bureaucracies and organizations to listen is to actually engage in productive, professional type conversations, which is what we're doing right now with you engaging Congress. It's painful as it can sometimes be, and I'll only speak for myself. Like me, I'm 3 years into trying to still work out my disability rating with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it frustrates me. But the Department of Veterans Affairs isn't going anywhere, right? And so putting kind of the ego aside, we need to pull alongside places like the NIH and go, hey, we're here, right? Here's what the science is saying. Here's what patients are saying. Here are some recommendations and suggestions. And I think we have to realize this is, you know, my opinion again, a marathon and not a sprint. There are people suffering right now, and we want so much to wave the wand and flick the switch. Having worked in Dise, including in the White House twice, that's not how policy and strategic things that we need happen. So to try to get that patience to pull alongside people, you know, organizations that may frustrate us like the VA or the NIH is the only answer. I think it's the right thing to do, even when it's hard.
Right. So we have to pull alongside. I love that expression. Hey, guess what? Dr. Alcott is back. John,
you lose me.
Yeah, we lost. You were just finishing up cost to society and moving on to slide treatment of persistent symptoms in Lyme disease.
Yeah. Well, I apologize for that. And
yeah, no problem.
What happened.
It's not your fault, I'm sure.
I mean, what I wanted to end with basically was the incredible hope that research can apply to this field, and how we solved big problems like this before. We've cured hepatitis C. People just got the Nobel Prize for that. We brought better health to AIDS and HIV, cancer, that there's hope here if we can apply things. So I don't know if you want me to pick back up or not. It's up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were on treatment of persistent symptoms in Lyme disease. I'm sharing my screen right now, but do you want to share your screen?
No, let's just go ahead with this. So, the key take home here is there's been no NIH sponsored treatment trials in Lyme disease. Click, click, click,
Thank you.
click. There's been no sponsored trials in 20 years, and that's just a travesty. We have basic science work now, we have animal models, and yet we've not translated those into clinical trials for humans in 20 years. That's unpicked fruit that's hanging there that needs to be harvested and tested. Next slide. And the tick-borne disease working group kind of, just go ahead and click through these, address this. And we issued a report that really brought together people to talk about all these things. And the common theme in every one of these chapters in the tick-borne disease working group report was more research, more education, more that needs to be done. There was no disagreement actually in those recurrent themes of the need for more research. Next slide. And so really the final, take home point is this report from the tick-borne disease working group shone a light on the gaps, and it called for open minds, education, and funding for research. And the bottom line is that we can do this. I've seen this in my own career and with the example of hepatitis C. And I always tell people, that there's so much low-hanging fruit in Lyme disease research, so much we can do to help our patients, because we've developed these amazing technologies through research in HIV and AIDS and oncology. All we need to do is apply that research to Lyme disease, and we can solve this thing.
Absolutely. Lyme, I've always believed, is a solvable problem. We just need to put more effort into it. And that's why we need a Lyme Moonshot. So I want to, at this point, if you don't mind, is to see if there were any Q&As that we'd wanted to address here. Let's see if I can make this work here. I'm going to read this from Carmen. Really appreciate Nicole's presentation. What are we doing to help vets in diagnosing and getting treatment? I have a vet in my group, and he was discharged due to somatic symptoms, in quotes. And according to him, the VA laughs at him when he suggests Lyme disease. What do you suggest there, Nicole?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Carmen. And most importantly, thank you for putting your arms around a veteran who needs help. It's interesting. The #1 cause of death for Lyme disease and tick-borne illness patients is suicide. There's been papers and research done on that, and it's sad. And we talk every day about protecting our veterans, right, from suicide, 22 deaths a day. I'm a person just like this veteran that you're talking to who's standing in that abyss between two communities, the Lyme disease and tick-borne illness community, which he may or may not have, as well as obviously the veterans issues that we're all dealing with. Sadly, in my experience, I realized that the Department of Veterans Affairs is just as uneducated and unaware as the Department of Defense military medicine, in my opinion, as well as civilian doctors. I don't want there to be any spears specifically thrown at the DoD and VA, because honestly, it's across the board, our entire medical system, military and civilian alike, that is behind on education and awareness. So remember, the VA is going to provide him or her two kind of distinct pathways. One is VA medical care, right, to get treatment for current symptoms that he or she may be having. And the other is going to be the VA disability route. You would think they would talk to each other. They do not. They're completely different silos. It is a bureaucracy that's difficult to navigate, especially when you're sick, with things that can impact your brain and cognitive function like Lyme disease. The #1 thing that can happen here is, I think, get him or her connected with what's called a case manager at a VSO, a Veteran Service Organization. All of the major national veteran service organizations, if you go online, will assign case managers to help peel back the layers and the craziness of the unnecessary bureaucratic administrative ad nauseum stuff that the VA makes you do. I'm sorry if I'm letting you know how I feel about all that. There's no way a sick person can navigate that themselves. And these experienced case managers at these VSOs will have great advice about how to get the care that they need for the current symptoms, but also how to navigate disability benefits. In many cases with a lot of the tick-borne illnesses, especially the chronic ones, because I'm working with the VA right now on my own case, it's about rating and dealing with each and every individual symptom, which for a Lyme disease and tick-borne illness patient can be a very long list and very overwhelming. Also, I think connecting the veteran with any kind of local Lyme disease and tick-borne illness groups, at some point, if you can't get help, through the traditional VA medical system. It's going to be a cost-benefit analysis on that individual patient's part, to keep knocking on doors until we find a doctor who is willing to very reasonably, sounds like, test somebody for Lyme disease. It's ridiculous and sounds unreasonable to me that we wouldn't rule out Lyme disease and tick-borne illnesses, especially considering the increased risk of military members. But if you could, one, thank you, Carmen, for putting your arms around this service member. And two, let's get a case manager at a veteran service organization. There may be some locally, and there's definitely a lot nationally.
Oh, wonderful, Nicole. Thank you for that answer. Carl Tuttle wrote in, with statistics like Dr. Aka has shown, why isn't Lyme disease a public health emergency? Good question. We need a Manhattan Project to find a cure now. Well, some of you guys might have a comment on this, but I'd like to comment that the alternative name for our Lyme Moonshot was, a 21st Century Manhattan Project, or the Lyme Manhattan Project. Carl, you've hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned, and that's why we're doing, that's why we're proposing a Lyme Moonshot, because we need to raise this issue up and ask for help within both the legislative and the executive branches. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I mean, it's just when we look at the amount of resources that have gone into, when Nixon announced, the war against cancer, you look at the resources that went into that when we, addressed the war on HIV/AIDS, the resources, and, there was a return on those investments. So, I think we'll get a similar return if we had a similar magnitude of investment.
So yeah, thank you for that. We have another question. Can someone give some examples of that low-hanging fruit research that needs to be done? So I have this is Bonnie, I have a comment on that. I wouldn't consider it low-hanging research, but the most important thing that we can do is get a very reliable diagnostic, because that has enormous impact on this patient population. So if we have a reliable diagnostic that works early, both early in the disease, right? You can get a test that's reliable, and you can treat it early. The problem, of course, is that if you're not diagnosed early and you end up with persistent symptoms, it's really hard to get rid of this disease. So the other reason that we want a good diagnostic is because that is the key to getting a working therapy. It's really, really hard to run a good clinical trial without having a good diagnostic. You're measuring the outcome of the trial based on symptoms, and it's really hard to get statistically significant results with that. So I'm going to open it up to the panel if anyone else has a comment on the low-hanging fruit research.
So one area that, we're currently funded by the Cohen Foundation to do is looking at the variables that go into determining who's going to develop chronic illness. And the low-hanging fruit there is, it's just amazing. With the blood samples we have, we can do total gene expression, sequence all the mRNA to reflect that, do proteomics and look at all the proteins that are there. We just published a paper on metabolomics and the microbiome. These were technologies that we didn't even have those words 15 years ago. And they're all done on small volumes of blood because of the advances in technology. So we're really mapping out what goes haywire in people after they've had Lyme disease. And the take-home point is, a lot goes haywire. People's gene regulation patterns don't return to normal after they've been treated for Lyme disease. We just published that in people that remain ill, their metabolome doesn't return to normal. And all these technologies didn't even exist, 20 years ago. Low-hanging fruit, because all that technology was there, ready to use because it's been developed in other fields.
Yeah, so applying things that we've learned in other fields to Lyme disease can be very, very useful. Absolutely. I have a question from Paul Garcia. Why not summarize the conflict between the IDSA and ILADS? Well, we do actually mention that in the Lyme Moonshot paper, but we haven't chosen to focus on that here because we're trying to give a vision for how we might be able to inspire people to help us with this problem. And focusing too much on that conflict does not, in my opinion, does not advance the research that we need in order to solve the problem. From the panel standpoint, Jeff or Nicole or Dr. Alcott, do you have any comments on this question?
I mean, I'll say that, I always tell people that you know, that there's a lot of polar opposites, but people forget there's also a lot of people in the middle. And I think they get overlooked sometimes. And there actually is a middle ground that's isn't always get a lot of attention. And because there's probably grains of truth, you know, on both sides. And like you said, maybe we just need a middle ground that moves things forward.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Alcott. In my experience sitting on a lot of these boards like CDMRP or the HHS Tick-Borne Disease Working Group, I've been exposed to the vast majority who I think are open-minded, trying to do the right thing. It is controversial. It can feel, you know, chaotic, but dealing in the polar extremes for me is a waste of my time, talent, and treasure. And I think it's inefficient use of all of our time, talent, and treasure. This is just, again, my opinion. When I would fly into combat, which is one of the most chaotic things I've ever done, the last thing I would tell my wingmen is be a help, not a hindrance. And I prefer to join forces with people who are trying to be a help and not a hindrance. And that's this beautiful middle ground where people like Dr. Alcott exist, my opinion.
Yeah, and I'd say agreeing with John, Dr. Alcott, and Nicole. I mean, we found that our activities on Capitol Hill, we've kind of, you know, created this kind of violent center and support on a bipartisan basis around these issues. I mean, the passage of the KA Tick Act kind of brought both sides together in a major way. And we were able to pass that piece of legislation in literally 6 months from the time we got engaged to the time the president signed into law. So, you know, I think a lot can be done focusing on the issues at hand and pushing and urging Congress to act to create more opportunities for infusion of federal dollars so we can expand the research. And that's really that's our primary focus on at Center for Lyme Action.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from Jennifer. Can you discuss more about public-private partnerships? What can a private foundation or what can private foundations do to help you accomplish your goal and make this Lyme Moonshot a reality? Well, in terms of the public-private partnerships, you know, it's really exciting that the Cohen Foundation has made a donation grant to HHS to fund those 3 initiatives that the Deputy Secretary talked about. But if there are other foundations out there that have the means to do something very significant like that, it would the contact is actually 2 people who work for the Deputy Secretary. One is Admiral Jouar, who is the Assistant Secretary for Health. So Lyme Innovation and the LymeX program reports into Admiral Jouar. And then the person actually running Lyme Innovation and the LymeX program is Kristen Honey. And so those people are, you know, they're public servants, and they, if there are foundations that are interested in doing some sort of public-private partnership to continue or enhance the LymeX program, I would recommend reaching out to them. Anybody else have any comments on that? All right, and if not, we're running up against we had promised this to be a 75-minute event, and I just want to end with Jill's comment. It's critically important that Lyme leaders participate in the 3rd and final HHS Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. And here, this one's for you, Dr. Alcott. I hope Dr. Alcott will resume as the chair for this. No pressure. Okay. No pressure. No pressure. Okay, what's next? First of all, I want to thank all of our speakers who participated in our Lyme Moonshot event today. Go to lymemoonshot.org to read our paper. If you're a congressional staffer, I hope that you'll work on expanding programs for Lyme disease. And then if you are a Lyme advocate, please attend our virtual fly-in in February of 2021. Go to our website, or you'll receive an invitation if you've signed up for this event. All right. Thank you all very much for all of your time and attention, and we look forward to a successful launch of our Lyme Moonshot. Thank you.